Karen Wunderlin is here with us today to talk about working effectively across the generations. When I joined Rotary some 21 years ago, I did it in part because it was the only place people still would call me young man. I turned 65 in 2 weeks and still consider myself a kid. Clyde, you're my latest hero. Keep going. Further, I expect everyone in the workplace to think exactly the same way I do and be motivated the same way I am. Yeah, right. I first met Karen when she designed and facilitated the Leadership Network sponsored by Leadership Louisville and the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. Karen combines her experience as an operating executive with her knowledge of group processes to help clients identify necessary change and then implement it on a personal, team, or organizational level. Whew. Before founding the Wunderlin Company, Karen was a sales marketing executive at General Electric. Karen has worked with organizations to facilitate change, growth, and cultural development for 23 years. And she added leadership coaching to that in 1998. She has worked with organizations of all size and scope in North America, Asia, and Europe. And she has been studying and coaching her clients on working more effectively across the generations at work for the past 5 years. Karen, the stage is yours.
Good morning. Just want to get the slides going here. Perfect. I've got them here too. All right, so I'm so pleased to be with you this morning, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense for how I got to have this as some subject matter. Before I do that, I would really like to acknowledge Dr. Kevin Rose, who's my guest here at the President's Table. Kevin's a professor at U of L. Any of the statistics and background research that I quote is courtesy of Kevin and his great work. And he may be one of the few millennials in the room. I don't know. So he and Laura, maybe you guys got some heavy lifting to do in the next couple of minutes. So I got into this work because one of my clients called me about 5 years ago, and she said, you know, we have all these managers, we've hired a bunch of new engineers, and it just is not working. We are having all kinds of trouble, and can you help us kind of figure out what's going on there? And from that came this work that we call the Generations at Work. I'm going to give you about 20 to 25 minutes today, so it's pretty compressed, and I've focused down on just a couple key messages that I hope you'll find valuable. Got to turn it on. It's a key thing. There we go. So I want to define the generations for you, tap into your own knowledge, and talk a little bit about 3 key ways that these generations are very different in how they work. Okay? So I thought it might be fun if we started off with a game. On every table, you'll find some sheets called The Music of the Generations. If you'd pass those around and grab a pencil or pen. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. I'm going to play about 20 seconds of 9 songs. If you can name the song, that's a good thing. If you know who's singing it, that's even better. Okay? So, let's just see.
An old cowpoke went riding out one dark and windy day. Upon a ridge he rested as he went along his way.
I thought you were right for me.
Turn that one up.
Felt so lonely in your company.
These songs were all #1 on the Billboard chart in the year they came out. lot of people in this room who are going to get this one pretty quickly.
Fighting soldiers from the sky.
Number one in 1966.
Fearless men who jump and die. Men who mean just what they say.
Stay away from my window.
This was number one in 1958.
Penso che un sogno così non ritorni mai più. Mi dipingevo le mani e la faccia di blu. Poi d'improvviso venì.
1994. Oh, maybe 2000. 2000.
Dance across your face, and I've never been this swept away.
Uno, dos, 1, 2, 3, 4. ¡Eh! ¡Pule, pule!
That's a gimme. That's the name of the song. All right. So, the likelihood is, how many had this experience? You knew some of them on the first note. How many of them were like, I have no idea, you could play the whole thing, I would never, ever know? Yeah. So this is why I start off with music when we talk about the generations. It turns out that there are songs that just speak to us. We play two notes and we go right back to, and it turns out, for most of it, it's our teenage years. And there's something about music and the development of a teenage brain, the part of our brain that processes emotion. When we're teenagers, that part of our brain is hyperactive, and it turns out music really does mean more to us as teens than the rest of our lives. So when we have that common thing where you feel like, oh my God, hip hop, I can't understand it. Why do my children like it so much? That's what our parents felt about the rock and roll that we listened to in the 50s and 60s, and that their parents felt about the big band sound that they listened to in the 30s and 40s. So I want you to understand that musical differences are like a lot of the differences that we experience today. If it's a generational difference, it just a lot of times has to do with what we learned when we were growing up. And they aren't necessarily right, some are right, but in many cases they're just different. Okay? So in case you're wondering, here's the answers. Who had number one, Riders in the Sky? Anybody know it was Vaughn Moore? All right, over here, a musical genius. Vaughn Monroe, thank you. See, I wasn't even alive. So, who knew? Laura or Kevin, somebody get me who that second song was? Someone That I Used to Know by Gautier. Number one in 2012. Bridge Over Troubled Water, kind of a gimme. The Sign, I put that in there because it's a particular earworm for me. My children loved this song, and it was pounded into my head in 1994 every time we were in the car. Who got the Battle of the Green Berets? Yeah. One of the key generational differences I've noticed if you talk to folks who are below the age of 40, If you were a baby boomer, for most people, how many men in this room know what their lottery number was if you were eligible for the draft? It was a big deal. There isn't even a draft anymore. For young people, that whole construct is a complete question mark. There's no way to even connect to what it felt like to be part of a draft system. Think how formative that was to people who were of age. Tonight's the Night, Rod Stewart. Anybody get that? Yeah, the 90s. Who got Volare? Anybody? I don't know if I can even. Domenico Modugno was 1958. Breathe by Faith Hill. And then finally, Woolly Bully by Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, right? It's been used enough in music around the world that a lot of people still get that even though it wasn't their particular year. So, let's talk about defining the generations. No. Oh, shoot. So, for the most part, the work that I do focuses on 3 generations: the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, and the millennials. And that's because that's who's in the workforce right now. The silent generation, which may include some folks in this room, if you were born between 1925 and 1945, there are still some working, but very few. Last year, in 2015, millennials became the largest cohort of the workforce. There are 53 million millennials in the workforce. There are more of them than Gen Xers and more of them than baby boomers. And here's the other math that's interesting. Baby boomers are retiring at the rate of 8,000 to 10,000 a day. In the total generation, there are about 80 million baby boomers who are alive, about 40 million Gen Xers, and about 82 million millennials, and that's going to grow over the next 5 years because of immigration. So when you think about the numbers in the workforce, as the baby boomers make that huge sucking sound as they leave the workforce, there aren't enough Gen Xers to replace all the jobs that we're creating when we leave. And the millennials are going to come flooding. If they're not in your workforce now, they are going to come flooding in, and every organization has to be ready. A lot of organizations I work with have things to say about people in their 20s. I don't know if anyone in this room would be brave enough to repeat anything that's been said about millennials in your workplace. Any volunteers? Lazy. What else? Entitled. What else? Independent. Anything else? Soft. They don't. You know what? I'm going to come back to that. It's an important thing. Fearless. Okay. Also, can't write in cursive. Can't spell. What they would tell you is, I don't need to. Mission driven. Okay? So there are some things about millennials that people like us like to talk about, and what I want to say to you about the next 15 or so minutes is, think really hard about how to be open to these people. Think really hard about what your challenges are with them have to do with their youth. I don't know about you all, but if I had to go experience myself in my 20s as a workforce person, there are some moments there that are just not my shining moments, right? When we're young, when we're in our 20s, we sort of fail our way to success, and that has always been true. So think about folks from that perspective of how much of this is just because they're young and inexperienced. And then how much of it is because millennials are really different and we need to figure this out because we're going to need these people to want to work in our company. This is already true on the two coasts. Many companies on the two coasts are already reorganizing themselves to create workplaces that are attractive to millennials. Because if millennials are not picking up what you're putting down at the workforce, they will leave and they will find someplace that is more satisfying. And when all those boomers retire, we turn around and there's not enough Gen Xers to cover all the bases, we're going to need these millennials. So organizations that start early, making themselves attractive to these folks, are the ones who are going to win. In the spirit of time, I'm going to jump over talking about boomers because we all know plenty about ourselves and we know who the fun boomers are, including us. Gen X is this small generation. They're primarily known for folks as latchkey kids, right? They were that first generation whose moms went to work and came home from school pretty frequently to take care of themselves. And they're kind of the translators. They frequently tell me when I do longer seminars with workplace groups, I feel like I'm the translator. Like they're pretty comfortable. The first video games came out when they were kids, but they were kind of rudimentary, right? I'm going to talk a little bit more about the millennials. Okay. So these are some of the formative things about millennials. The first black president was elected in their lifetime. Anybody know all those little symbols, right? Those are social media companies that have been invented in their lifetime. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, the iTunes button, 9/11, Nancy Pelosi, first female Speaker of the House. So a lot has happened, and a lot of pretty devastating things have happened. It's one of the reasons they're so mission-driven. And just in case you're not aware, these are some sort of famous millennials. But what I want to do is jump to what it is we need to focus on in the workplace. There's 3 things, and I'm going to talk about each one. The first is career goals. Folks in the silent generation, who's here that was born between 24 and 45? Right? And I'm going to guess that many of you had a career where you were able to work at the same organization for a very long part of your career. They're kind of the last generation that had that kind of company man experience, right? And they wanted to build a legacy. Baby boomers came along. There were so many of us. We cracked and broke almost everything in the 60s. We created a lot of revolution and change. And when we came to the workforce, we took the same hard-driving approach. I was married to a fellow for a long time who was a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War. And when we got married, there was a little party for us, and somebody was playing marital trivia. One of the questions was, if you had met Karen and David in 1968, who had longer hair? The answer was David, right? But we went to the workplace, we mostly cut our hair, and we got to work. And what we were interested in was building a stellar career. We are very accomplishment-oriented as a generation. Gen X saw their parents get laid off, downsized, have to change careers. Baby boomers have not had the joy of being at the same organization for most of us for our whole career. So Gen Xers were watching their parents have that experience, and what they will tell you is, I think of my career in 5 to 7 year increments, and I want to do things at this organization that I'm going to be able to take to the next one. Here's what millennials say. I want to have a bunch of careers all at the same time. They have no loyalty. They will never have any loyalty because they've now seen this go on for 40 years. And they know that if they don't take care of their own career, there's nobody out there going to take care of it for them. Here's a couple stories. My son has a really good friend. My son's going to be 27 this summer. He graduated from college with this guy, and he got a job at Google out in Palo Alto. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this guy has won the lottery. How fabulous is this? So he went out to San Francisco. This guy's name is Tom. While he was working at his Google job, he was working on an app at night. And when his app got to a certain amount of sales that was less than his annual salary at Google, he quit his job because he has parallel portable careers. In the last 5 years, that guy has worked at 3 startups and he has launched 5 apps. And he is a prototypical millennial. This also works, though, if you're not a college high-tech engineer. I work with a company over in southern Indiana, has a big welding shop. The person who runs the welding organization has just recently hired a bunch of young millennials under 30 to work in his welding shop. 2 things. They won't work overtime, right? Because they all have a business on the side. So they're very hardworking, but they're not very hardworking in that long-term loyalty to your organization kind of context. I had a woman at a session like this who raised her hand one time and said, I'm so devastated. I found this young woman, I made her my protege, I taught her everything I know, and after 3 years she left. And she was like, isn't that awful? And what I say is, if you have a program where it takes you 3 years to teach people what you need to know, you are going to be frustrated. Because millennials will never wait 3 years, right? And because if you're not sticky, if you're not moving fast enough, they will move along. We got to find a different model, right? In our minds, boomers and Gen Xers are more likely to value hierarchy and wisdom and length of experience and the stars that we earn over our years. Millennials, they don't so much. What they say is we know a lot of different stuff and we learn while we're doing. And the fact that you've been doing something for 35 years makes me think I might know some stuff that you should know, not that I should totally defer to you in everything. So know in career paths, when you have millennials, if you're thinking about their careers the way you thought about yours, there's probably a disconnect. And there's some wonderful opportunities to engage with them about what career development opportunities would make this a more meaningful workplace for you. The second one is work-life balance. These guys who won't work overtime. This fella who runs that plant ran it for years with a bunch of fellas who are now in their late 50s who are retiring, and they ran a lot of overtime. And those fellas paid for their houses, sent their kids to college, bought bass boats, and did all kinds of things with those overtime earnings. They were more than delighted to work that way. Now this guy is working with a bunch of millennials, and what he said to me is, these millennials, they won't work, they don't work hard. So we kind of unpeeled that onion a little bit, and it turns out, well, when they're here, first shift, Monday through Friday, yeah, they work, they do their job, they're pretty enterprising and fairly creative, but they don't want to work overtime because they have things they're doing outside of work that are just as important to them as work. And all those decisions that Xers and boomers and probably the silent generation made, where we put our work in front of the other aspects of their lives, they just plain are not going to ever do that. That's just not the way they work. Now, are you going to meet millennials who are hard workers and will do those things? Yes. Anytime I talk about generations, I'm painting with a gigantic roller brush, and there's always exceptions to that rule. But if you're thinking about work-life balance in your workplace, and you're trying to build a workplace that's attractive to this tsunami of new workers, recognizing that hanging on to old models about how you succeed, another big one for millennials is having your fanny in the chair at work. What they say to me is, I'm working all the time. If they have their phone, that's as good as their computer to them, right? And they'll work at midnight, they'll get up at 4, they'll come in from the club, do a little email at 2 a.m. They're young, sleep is a concept for them, not a necessity. Right? But if we've run our workplaces where what we expect is people to be here at 8 a.m. and to stay here, and we stay here until the boss leaves, right? That's just not going to be an appealing workplace for millennials. Right? And then the final is around feedback. And this is the one thing that you can take back to your workplace and start doing differently tomorrow. The way boomers think about feedback is through performance management. Most of us are like, yeah, I'll sit down once a year. You could tell me I'm a 4.68. Last year I was a 4.62. So therefore I get this much raise. And we're used to not getting a lot of feedback unless we really mess up. Gen X is okay with feedback. They'd be like, let's sit down 3-4 times a year. This is a story an actual millennial told me. They brought me in, they sat me down. For 10 weeks, no one told me how I was doing, so I quit. And what they thought about that company was that that company was deeply flawed because it did not have robust feedback processes. One of the things people think about millennials is that they have to have, the trophy kids and they have to have a lot of affirmation. When I say feedback, I am not talking about you walking by their desk and telling them what a great job they're doing. Millennials grew up in a very feedback-rich environment. They grew up where their test scores were frequently available to them right away. They all play, at least the guys do, video games. The consequence of screwing up in a video game is you die and start all over again. They are used to feedback, and they want it. There's a wonderful article that was in the Harvard Business Review a couple of months ago by Deloitte, which is a huge consulting and accounting firm. And they've just completely overhauled and threw out their performance management system, which was very much like a baby boomer system Lots of competencies, lots of hours spent rating employees, millions of man hours for little or no change. And they've now changed their system. Every time, if I'm a Deloitte consultant, every time I finish a project, everybody on the project answers these 4 questions about everyone else on the project. Would you recommend this person for the highest raise? Would you want this person on every team that you're part of without qualification? Is this person at risk of leaving? And do you recommend this person for promotion? And those last 2 questions are yes, no's. The first 2 are on a 5-point scale. And you get that feedback every month or 2 on every project that you're part of. So they've pared it down, but the key thing is it's happening all the time. It's robust, and it's every couple of weeks. My son works for a healthcare IT company. He, at the ripe old age of 27, has 6 team leaders who each have between 4 and 10 people working for them, which I'm like, really? They let you have people work for you? But okay, good, congratulations. But he is expected to sit down with each and every one of his employees at least every 2 weeks, and he's expected to give them feedback every month. And that's a millennial-driven feedback system. They want it, they need it. If you don't give it to them, they will think badly of your workplace and badly of you as a manager. They want to know, and they want to know now. And they can take it. They will not cry. I promise they will not cry. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to stop it there and just say it's been great to be with you all. Covered kind of a lot in a few minutes, but I'd be glad to take some questions if there are any.
Karen, thank you. We're going to open up the microphones. Microphones are open for questions. Don't forget our 3 rules that are going to pop up sometime. You've got whatever they are. So we'll just open them up. Mike Brunleave's in the back.
Mike Brumley. First question was, I listened to all this. I'm a Gen Xer. I absolutely respected the earlier generations. The problem is how do the millennials show respect for us? That's my first question. So you want to answer that?
Well, so the question is, when you say respect me, what I would say to, if I had that millennial, I had that question, I'd be in a conversation with them, and I'd be talking to them about what respect looks like to you.
Okay.
Because for them, this is a much more informal generation. They would walk in here and they would say, too formal, not doing that, right? They don't want to dress up. They don't want to join country clubs. They won't buy subscriptions to arts organizations because that's not how they work. So depending on what we think respect looks like, it's important to get to that specific behavior so they know. If they know something's really important to you, they're hard workers and they want to succeed. But if they believe they know something you don't know and you won't listen to them and that feels like them not respecting you, they would probably say, well, you're right. If you listen to me, I will listen to you. Does that resonate with your question?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't have a predetermined answer to that one. My second question was, you probably saw this on CBS Sunday Morning a few months ago. They were talking about the millennial generation, and there was a comment made in the Journal of Management by millennials. And it said, millennials want the combination of not working hard, but still wanting more money and status. Elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, so when you think about, I just will personalize this. When I was a young person in my early 20s, just graduated from graduate school, my early 20s dream was I wanted to succeed. I wanted to make a lot of money, but my picture of it was I wanted to do it by being very successful at GE and climbing the ladder and becoming a person of recognition there. So for me, those are the dreams that we have in our 20s about what we want. Millennials have seen a lot of people, look at the folks who run most of the social media startups. They're all working really hard now, but they made a lot of success relatively early and made a lot of money. So there is this model out there for things being differently. And there are, I don't want to ever paint a picture of like they're monolithic. There are Gen X or Gen Millennials who were coddled too much and don't know how to work and don't know how to dress. And I think that's a failing of parenting myself, anyway.
Judy.
I'm Judy. How do you deal with these millenniums if you want them to be your customer or your client? You're not working with them in the same company.
Right. So here's an example. A millennial told me this. They said, I could tell how old a person is by the emails I get from them. Boomers and the silent generation treat email like an electronic letter. It has a salutation, a greeting, and a closing. I was like, oh my God, I always do that. Dear Barry, and I always sign everything, all the best, and I even have an electronic signature. It says Karen. Right? And what they say is like, when we do emails, which we don't prefer, we just say what we want to say. Or we use Twitter, or we use Snapchat, or we use something else. So I think a key thing for us who want them as their customers is we have to meet them where they are, and we have to let go of some of the things that seem important to us, like lengthening a sentence so that it's complete. They don't care. They don't care.
Larry, in back.
Hi, Larry Sloan, Karen. Thanks for doing this today. I hope you can send us a copy of your presentation as well. I'm involved as a volunteer in fundraising at my church and at this club and other organizations. Have you got any particular twists? We see pledging dropping off in the millennial generation. It's the silent generation and the other people below that generation who commit regularly. What do you think about that?
Who's the person who said mission-driven? There was somebody back there that talked about how mission-driven the millennials are. They are totally mission-driven. So the good news is, if you've got an organization that has a relevant purpose, they are very mission-driven people. They say to me 100%. I interviewed a guy last week who is working on Wall Street for a real estate hedge fund. And what he said is, I need to find work that's meaningful. I've been making big bucks for 5 years, and this is not working. And a lot of those places are finding that. So the good news is, if you have a message, it can be very relevant. What we have to watch for is using the mechanisms that worked for Silent, Boom, and X with millennials. How do millennials donate money? Who knows? Crowdfunding, online, buttons, right? And so we have to meet them where they are and raise money in the way they're willing to give. Here's some other good news on that subject. They have the highest savings rate of any generation since the silent generation. Here's the other news about them. They have the highest level of college debt of any generation ever. And many of them came to the workplace in the teeth of the 2008 financial recession. So many of them had a start off to their career that looked like this. So as they age, if you find them where they are and have a mission that they can connect with, the predictions are they will give. But once again, like not buying season subscriptions to actors, 5-year capital campaigns, I don't even know if I'll still be here. Right? So we have to change our systems.
Harriet Friedlander. I was very interested in what you said about millennials in the workforce not wanting to do the 8 to 4 or 9 to 5.
Right.
So what do you do if you're a service-driven or a schedule-driven organization? I think about Barry at River City, where he needs his drivers there on time. Or, a nonprofit that needs its social workers there meeting people when they come in.
Right.
How do you manage that?
So there's the big part, like the non-negotiable part of the job. We can't have the buses with no drivers in them. That's just part of the entry of work. But for example, I have a hospital client down in Texas who completely had all these young nurses, was having a hard time filling jobs, the nurses coming out of school, because they were requiring their nurses all to rotate through the 3rd shift, and they didn't want to do it. So they hired a bunch of nurses, and they came up with a different nursing model. And they worked with the millennials to say, what would you do? We have to, mission-driven. Do you agree we have to take care of the patients 24 hours a day? Yes, I do. Okay, recognizing that you have a side career as a sculptor or a side career as whatever, how can we figure out 40 hours that you'll commit to? For a lot of these, it's about getting the millennials into a room that work for you and saying, how can we work this out? They're great problem solvers. They are great problem solvers.
Sydney.
Hey, Sydney's my neighbor.
Was there ever this kind of push for Gen X people? It seems like Gen Xers were behind a really important group, and in front of a really important group, and nobody really cared much about us.
You're kind of like the middle children of a generation, right? You are kind of forgotten. You slipped in under the radar. There's going to be a period of time for the next 10 years or so. A lot of organizations are led right now by Gen Xers, and there's about another 10-year period. The thing about Gen Xers is there's just not enough of you all, right? And you're right. You're between two groups that get a lot of sunshine. But you can laugh all the way to the bank for the next 10 years while you're running the world.
I had a question. You were talking briefly about organizations. You know, Rotary is kind of going through the same thing, where you know there's a problem with the structure. Any suggestions you would recommend that we'll probably take up on if we could hear?
You know, I think requirements around long-term commitments, and at one point, don't you all have like 80% of the meetings, and you have to go to the meeting if you're out of town?
Those days are gone.
Those days are gone.
Yes.
Yeah. So. The thing about the millennials is the oldest ones are in their mid-30s, right? So there's still a lot of aging. They're going through big life events. Like I had my children in my early 30s. I didn't do anything until I was about 39 because I was so busy working and taking care of my kids. So some of this is we have to be patient. But if you're building relationships with millennials, they will be loyal to you. You just have to, again, have a conversation with them. You're fortunate enough to have some very bright young millennials as your fellows to say, you know, what would we have to change in order to make this, like your speakers, your music, the way this gets run, some of the things that you do don't feel millennial, they feel boomer silent gen. And they could tell you, and they would, because they love robust feedback and they don't mind giving it either. They would tell you. Yeah, they would probably prefer to see somebody make a playlist and have it run in the background on Pandora. They'd like people to be able to submit their own playlists. They would like, you know, there's 1,000 things. They'd like to be able to tweet while they're speakers. You know, when you're organized around millennials, you just do things differently.
Changing world.
It's a changing world.
Any other questions? If not, Karen, thank you so much. That was fantastic. That was great. Karen will be here after the meeting in case you'd like to talk to her. Don't forget our What is Rotary table in the corner, and